In a forest where mornings were never silent, the tallest trees held a place that every bird knew about, but not every bird reached. When the first light touched the leaves, the strongest voices gathered there and filled the air with songs that carried far beyond the branches. Animals paused without being asked, listening as if those songs understood something about them. It was not just sound, it was something complete, something steady, something certain. On a lower branch, slightly hidden behind a curve in the tree, lived a small gray bird named Leo. Every morning, he arrived before the others and sat quietly, watching the empty space above where the singers would soon take their place. He knew their rhythm without thinking. He knew where they would pause, where their voices would rise, and how they never hesitated. Sometimes when no one was around, he would try to follow them, repeating their notes softly, imagining what it would feel like to belong there. There was a time when that felt possible, until the day he tried. He had moved forward slowly that morning, his heart beating faster than it ever had, not from effort, but from the fear of being seen. He waited for a small gap between songs, just enough space for his voice to enter. He opened his beak and sang, but the first note came out smaller than he expected. He tried to steady it, but the next one slipped. His rhythm didn't match the others. The sound he had practiced in his head didn't come out the same way. He felt it breaking while it was happening, like something slipping out of his control. He tried to continue, but his voice didn't follow him, so he stopped. The forest didn't. The other birds continued singing as if nothing had happened. No one turned, no one reacted. No one noticed that he had begun or that he had stopped. He stood there for a moment, waiting for something, anything, that proved he had been heard, but nothing came. He stepped back slowly, returning to his branch, carrying something heavier than failure. It was the feeling that it didn't matter. After that day, Leo didn't stop loving music, but he stopped finishing it. Whenever he practiced alone, he would begin with focus, trying to fix what went wrong. But the moment something felt off, his body reacted before his mind could stop it. He paused, restarted, then stopped again. Over time, he became someone who didn't fail loudly, but never reached the end of anything. Days turned into weeks. He stayed in the same place, close enough to listen, far enough not to try again. He watched other birds improve, their voices becoming stronger, more certain, and slowly, without saying it out loud, he began to believe something that place wasn't for him. One evening, when the forest had grown quieter, Leo heard something different. It wasn't strong or steady, but it didn't stop. The voice continued even when it slipped, even when it didn't sound right, and that was what caught his attention. He followed the sound and found a small bird sitting on a low branch, scratching words into a piece of bark and whispering them out loud. The bird noticed him and paused. She quickly said it didn't sound right yet, but Leo looked at her and replied that it wasn't finished yet. She tilted her head slightly and smiled, introducing herself as Mira. Mira wasn't trying to sound perfect. She was trying to say something real. She wrote lines, spoke them, changed them, and tried again, not stopping even when it didn't feel right. Leo stayed that day, then came back the next, and again after that. Soon others joined them. Rin, who understood rhythm and helped keep everything steady. Sarah, whose soft voice carried emotion that stayed even after the sound faded. Keo, who doubted himself constantly, but noticed small mistakes others missed and quietly corrected them. They didn't come together because they were confident. They came together because they had all stopped before finishing and were trying not to do that again. Their early days were difficult. Some sessions ended in silence, some in frustration. Mira would struggle to find the right words. Rin would lose rhythm. Sarah would stop singing halfway, and Leo would feel that old urge rising again, the instinct to step back before things fell apart. One evening, after repeating the same mistakes again and again, Leo stopped mid-song and said it wasn't changing. No one argued because they all felt it. Mira looked at the unfinished bark in front of her and said that if they left now, it would stay like that forever. That stayed with him because unfinished wasn't just the song, it was him. The next day they returned again, not with confidence or certainty, but with the decision to stay. They practiced differently after that, not trying to be perfect, but trying to reach the end. Mira completed her lyrics, not because they were flawless, but because they were honest. She wrote about feeling unseen, about stopping too soon, about wanting to continue but not knowing how. Rin built a steady rhythm around her words. Sarah carried the emotion. Keo adjusted what needed to be fixed. And Leo stayed with every note, even when his voice shook, even when it didn't feel right. He continued, because finishing mattered more than sounding perfect. Time passed and something began to change, not suddenly but clearly. Their songs became stronger, not because they were perfect, but because they were complete. Their voices aligned more often, their endings no longer broke, and what they created began to feel real. One morning while they were singing, a deer nearby slowed down and didn't leave immediately. The next day a rabbit stopped, then a fox. The birds didn't react, because they had been doing this every day. The only difference now was that someone was finally staying long enough to hear it. Mira's lyrics began to carry through the forest, reaching places sound alone never could. The animals didn't just hear the song, they recognized it. The words spoke about trying and stopping, about wanting to continue but not having the strength, about feeling unseen and still showing up. One evening after the song ended, an old deer remained and quietly said that it felt like they were saying something it had always felt but never understood. That was the moment Leo realized something had changed. This wasn't just music anymore. It was connection. Days turned into weeks, and more animals gathered, not because they were told to, but because they wanted to listen. The branch they once sat on could no longer hold the attention that grew around them, and the forest that once ignored them now made space for them. One morning, the tallest branches were empty. The usual singers hadn't arrived, and the forest waited in silence. Then someone turned toward Leo and his group and simply asked them to sing. Leo felt the same fear return, the same memory, the same hesitation, but this time he didn't step back. He looked at the others, and though they were unsure, they were still there, and that was enough. They moved forward together. When they began, their voices were not perfect, but they didn't stop. Mira's words flowed through the forest, honest and real, speaking about staying when everything inside tells you to leave, about continuing when it feels pointless, about finishing something even when you're not sure it matters. The forest didn't just listen, it felt it. Some animals lowered their heads, some closed their eyes, some stayed long after the song ended, because it didn't feel like a performance, it felt like truth. It didn't happen all at once, and it didn't come from a single moment. It grew quietly through all the days they chose to continue instead of stepping back. What once felt unnoticed slowly became something others could no longer ignore. And the place they had once watched from a distance became the place they could stand without fear. They were no longer seen as birds trying to be heard, but as voices the forest returned for, not because they were perfect, but because they stayed long enough for their effort to become real. And Leo, who once stepped away before finishing even a single note, now stood at the center of something he had once believed was never meant for him. Not because he had changed into someone else, but because he finally stopped leaving before reaching the end. What you saw in Leo is something many people carry quietly in their own lives, because most people don't completely give up. They just stop halfway, again and again, until they begin to believe they were never meant to reach the end. But sometimes nothing around you needs to change first, because the moment you stop walking away from what you started, something begins to shift, slowly, quietly, but surely, until one day it becomes something real. They didn't become known when the forest started listening. They became known the day they stayed consistent, even when nothing seemed to change. Because every quiet effort was shaping a song the world would one day hear. So if your progress feels invisible today, keep going.